Hello everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Analyzing Good, featuring Luke Skywalker from Star Wars. Now the reason I decided to make this third episode is because I feel like The Last Jedi to this day created so many misconceptions about Luke Skywalker and his character, and I feel like I have to set the record straight and explain how it shouldn't take the expanded universe to show that his character was absolutely butchered in that movie. So for the sake of this video, expanded universe material will not be included, because I want to demonstrate ultimately that Rian Johnson made a lot of things up straight out of his ass. So let's begin. Luke Skywalker was born approximately 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, around 2 days after the end of the Clone Wars, alongside his twin sister Leia. He was the son of both Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala, and it was decided very early on that Luke would be raised on Tatooine with his family, with Obi-Wan Kenobi watching over him, with his sister being raised on Alderaan, as it was decided that given their immense power in the Force, they should be separated to minimize the risk. So Luke Skywalker was raised by his uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, who had no children. When it comes to Luke, it seems his childhood was a normal, albeit uneventful one. Being raised on the desert planet with two sons really set a drive for escapism and adventure. We can see that his uncle and aunt have opposing stances on how to react to his yearn for a way off Tatooine. Uncle Owen, as we all know, prioritized keeping Luke safe above all else, and was the one who told him that his father was a navigator on a spice freighter. His uncle wanted to hide his extraordinary gifts and raise him in peace away from the Empire and the Rebellion. It was only after the hand of fate that brought R2 and C-3PO back to Tatooine. I think his uncle, on top of misleading him on who his father was, also limited the resources he had to research the general history of the galaxy. The Clone Wars having ended right around the time he was born, I imagine Luke was curious about the war, but Owen told him a completely different version of the conflict, and as well as that, I imagine the Galactic Empire, having discredited the Jedi, downplayed their involvement in the Clone Wars, beyond telling everyone that they were a negative force that tried to overthrow the government. So I imagine those who were not born or couldn't remember a time before the Clone Wars were given a really skewed version of events. It's a good inference to explain why Luke Skywalker knew very little about the Jedi or the Force, or even the Clone Wars, beyond what Owen, and presumably Imperial propaganda, told him. Now, Luke may have bought into Imperial propaganda when it comes to aspects of the history he did not live through, but beyond that, it did not brainwash him. Luke, I imagine, accepted the history he was told because he didn't know any better. But his uncle and aunt were far more instrumental in raising him than the reach of the Empire. Remember that Tatooine was a planet outside their jurisdiction, being controlled by the Hutts and all. With that being said, it's easy to see that his uncle and aunt made sure that aside from having an uneventful and simple existence, that he was cared for. An uneventful life without any trauma is a complete contrast to his father, as his father was born and raised a slave, and lacking the basic right to be free. And we see his motivation in his early life was to become a Jedi and free his fellow slaves. It was an aspiration to become greater. Now, Luke did have the aspiration to be greater as well, but I think he also appreciated where he came from to an extent. Tatooine was a rough planet, and being a moisture farmer was far better than being a slave. Still, he dreamed of bigger and greater things, and as stated, he was responsible despite that. When R2-D2 wandered off, his first priority was to retrieve the droids first thing in the morning. And so actively hunting R2, he of course gets ambushed by the Sand People. And Ben Kenobi, as we all know, was there to save him. While not directly stated in the film, we can infer that topped with Revenge of the Sith, Luke probably went wandering off or got into trouble with hostile beings before, and Obi-Wan was there to save him. Although this is clearly the first time he saw Ben Kenobi, as he called himself, up close. Now, Luke previously assumed Ben and Obi-Wan were different people, which is why upon asking him, he got the confirmation that Obi-Wan was his previous name. After agreeing to go back with Obi-Wan to his place, he tells Luke more about the world than what he knew. Obi-Wan sees it's finally time to go out of hiding and tells Luke about the Jedi Knights and the Force. Now, as we all know, Luke's reaction to this was telling him that he can't go. He has responsibilities. So he didn't automatically jump to helping Obi-Wan, because despite the fact that he did want to leave Tatooine, he also knows that he can't automatically leave home. It's only after having the confirmation that his uncle and aunt were murdered by stormtroopers does he tell Obi-Wan that he wants to leave Tatooine, citing that there's nothing left for him here. This is where we get into the next part of his motivation, at least early on. You see, Obi-Wan didn't tell him everything about Darth Vader, and how Vader was his father, instead telling him a skewed version of the story where Darth Vader betrayed and murdered his father. So you can tell his general motivation in the beginning was to avenge his father's death. So with that being said, he also relied heavily on Obi-Wan for guidance on what to do. I imagine leaving Tatooine despite being what he wanted was a big commitment, and followed Obi-Wan on everything he did, including heading into Mos Eisley and the Cantina. He does try to stay out of trouble, such as when he's being harassed by the two criminals and Obi-Wan has to bail him out. But it's here where they obtain the services of Han Solo and Chewbacca. And as we see, Obi-Wan does most of the negotiating. And we can see that Luke protests that Han is overcharging on the passage to Alderaan, remarking that he and Obi-Wan could buy their own ship for 10,000. He also isn't too impressed by the Millennium Falcon, calling it junk once they're in the hangar bay. Now, some of Luke's early guidance and training under Obi-Wan was him being taught how to deflect laser bolts without being able to see, and he demonstrates early on that he had great potential. On the Death Star, he is greatly motivated to do the right thing, learning that Princess Leia is in a prison block and slated for execution. He coerces Han Solo to help him by telling him about how a princess would obviously be extremely wealthy, and so he, Han, and Chewbacca head straight for the prison block. Now, so far, we see that Luke had a peaceful, albeit uneventful upbringing. He was responsible, even after realizing he couldn't stay on Tatooine any longer, and was driven to do the right thing always. We see a lot in the original trilogy that he openly risked his life to save people, whether they be strangers or friend, or even enemy as we see later on. Luke throughout the first movie always acts out of a desire to help others, and being selfless in general, and he's guided always by what he feels is right, even when those wiser than him tell him that it's a bad idea. Luke very much was born to be a hero, and as such is motivated not by glory or victory, but out of a desire to help others. He does evolve over the course of the original trilogy, especially after learning that Darth Vader was his father and never died. And as we all know, his motivation shifted post-revelation into saving his father from the dark side, as he had faith there was still good in him, despite knowing all the atrocities he was responsible for, having indirectly fought him for 3 years as of the events of The Empire Strikes Back. But why? Well, Luke realized that the fall of Darth Vader was not as black and white as he originally thought, and that his father was once a good man, and that he could be saved. You could say that to some degree, it's biased towards a family member, and also not seeing the direct extent of his actions. This is something I want to get to in a future analysis of Ulic Queldroma, but having only been told about Darth Vader by Obi-Wan, and never knowing who his father was before he turned, Luke likely became more unbiased towards him, and thought that he could be saved. As mentioned before, both Obi-Wan and Yoda directly told him that he had to face and defeat his father, or the Emperor would win. But as we all know, Luke was proven right in the end. He had undying faith that his father could be saved. And even before the moment of redemption, Vader even tells Luke that it's too late for him, indicating that he knows that he's fallen so far. Now, Anakin Skywalker's redemption is another story, but Luke from his perspective believed without question that his father could be redeemed, and that there was always good in him deep down, and it was faith that paid off. He refused to kill his father after beating him, quickly realizing what the Emperor wanted him to do, and that he would not give in to the dark side. I think I also have to point out that Luke had his father's mistakes to look back on. while his father was not so lucky. He was groomed by the very evil entity that wanted to get rid of him and replace him with his son. So Anakin's early role model was extremely twisted and not in his best interests. Luke was intentionally shielded from such corruption and was able to make the right choice on his own when the time came. Luke represented what a Jedi was meant to be. Selfless, as he rejected the Emperor's trap and did the right thing, turning down the offer to fall to the dark side, as the Emperor then proceeded to punish him by electrocuting him. Luke, during all this, pleaded for his father to help him, and his father, out of compassion deep down, saved him and threw the Emperor down the shaft. Now, Luke also meant to save his father physically too, but his father assured him that he already was saved, and that he wanted to see his face before he died. Luke then set ablaze to his father's body out of respect, and I can imagine that the confirmation that he was right about his father further enforced his belief that anyone could be saved from the dark side, no matter how far they fell. Luke, at the end of the day, also contributed to the fall of the Empire, liberating the galaxy from Imperial tyranny, as there was celebration all around the galaxy. And I imagine that even without the expanded universe, Luke Skywalker throughout the original trilogy always acted out of compassion and empathy, and out of a desire to do the right thing. His disobedience to cease his training with Yoda did come from a good place at the end of the day, as it was out of care for his friends. He focused entirely on saving Han Solo after he was frozen, and didn't come back to train with Yoda until after he was done. And beyond that, he held great empathy for even his enemies. Case in point, Darth Vader, his father, because understanding he was once a good man, he knew he could be turned back given the right circumstances. Luke Skywalker is a hero that we all look up to at the end of the day. He defied everything trying to corrupt him, and chose to stay true to his morals, staying in control and not breaking them for anything. His compassion also paid off, as his friends ultimately survived, his father was redeemed, and he had become a Jedi Knight, free to reverse the damage did to it during the Empire. It's a simple arc, but it's extremely important, and it's also worth noting that we, at the end of the day, need heroes as well as villains. Heroes guide us, make us see what it is to be good, while villains do the opposite. And I feel as we progress as people, many have forgotten that we still, at the end of the day, need heroes to look up to idolize, to set our examples off of. Because as complicated as the world can be, we still need examples of heroism. It doesn't matter if a situation is black and white or morally grey. You still need to decide what the right choice is. And sometimes, the right choice isn't always easy in a morally grey situation. But you need to decide what the right choice is. Luke Skywalker always adapted to his mistakes and learnt from them, and this was important to his growth. But he still based his decisions off of what he believed was right, not for himself, but for everyone. And the reason I'm not including his depiction in The Last Jedi is simple. They regressed his character and made him alien to what he was, as well as not understanding who Luke Skywalker is supposed to be. It might have been said that you either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain, but this is usually said by either villains or those who are eventually corrupted by evil. Luke Skywalker had many personal tragedies. His uncle and aunt dying, Obi-Wan dying, his friend Biggs dying, etc. But he persevered despite that, and always made the right choice. And any decisions that weren't exactly 100% right always came from a good place. Luke Skywalker represents heroism, first and foremost, and his father, Anakin Skywalker, represents a fallen hero. And I just wanted to say that it's usually how a character's story ends that show us who they are. And since the main Star Wars story was meant to end with Return of the Jedi, and The Last Jedi is far from an accurate representation of his character, or a faithful evolution, I do not count it as valid in the slightest. Rian Johnson, like a lot of stupid people, believed in that dumbass equal light equal dark misconception and applied it onto Luke. And it's stuff like that, not understanding the source material, that rendered his depiction of Luke Skywalker extremely hollow. Luke Skywalker is the prime example of a hero, and what a hero is meant to represent: standing up for the weak, caring for others, and fighting for justice. And subverting his story into that of a fallen hero is not the purpose of Luke Skywalker. That was for his father. And Luke shows how one, learns from past mistakes, while his father did not. So with that being said, that is my analysis on Luke Skywalker. His arc is pretty simple, really, and he is very much meant to represent what a hero is. And The Last Jedi just ruined that. Now, analyzing good will not just be limited to those who started off good, stayed good, and ended good, as I also want to talk about characters who learnt how to become good in the end, which is why I want to do videos on those like Ulic Qel-Droma, as while he fell to the dark side, he came to accept what he did and show remorse, and ended his life as a good man, something which his partner in crime Exar Kun could not. I also want to talk about characters with clear moral agency or redemption arcs, such as Nico Bellic or the high honor version of Arthur Morgan. It's also a way to stand out from the vile eye at the end of the day, and become his counterpart, the righteous eye. So that's my plan. What do you think of Luke Skywalker? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes? Under the mountain.